Welcome to Capitol Hill. The federal government today stepped up its assistance to the live cattle export industry. The Prime Minister announced $30 million of what she called short-term hardship assistance to go to cattle producers and those who support the industry, like truck drivers and helicopter pilots. The non-means tested help is available through Centrelink, but the government hasn't yet delivered on what the cattle producers really want, and that's for the export trade to be restarted. The Prime Minister has also started reframing the carbon debate a little bit, focusing on the emissions trading scheme, and she wants a very short period of time between the carbon tax being introduced and the emissions trading scheme starting. Joining me to discuss the issues of the day are CLP Senator Nigel Scullion and Deb O'Neill, Labor MP. Welcome to you both.
Hello, Lyndall. Thank you for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Nigel, the government's $30 million of assistance is more than it has offered so far. Will that tide the cattle producers through between now and the time when the trade is restarted?
Well, you think you've got to see the $30 million, while it might seem a big number, it's actually $5,000 per business and extending perhaps to $20,000 later. Well, $5,000 isn't even going to feed the cattle for the day. We're talking about people who have a problem of having 2,000 and 3,000 cattle in yards that are costing $8.50 a day to feed. $5,000 really is not going to make much difference at all. And frankly, some of the feedback I've had back from industry is you're going to invest $30 million in 50 abattoirs in Indonesia at $600,000 each. It would immediately give them the capacity for all abattoirs to bring them up to speed. But clearly, again, this is a knee-jerk reaction. They certainly haven't consulted with industry before this announcement, and this situation's going from bad to critical. I have to say that the Indonesians, particularly, they've been offended and now quite angry that they haven't been consulted at all before this decision. And the first process, I suppose, is a complete breach of G20 when the ink wasn't even dry on the page. G20 fundamentally prescribes the way we behave with our neighbour on a whole range of issues, including sanctions. Indonesia see this as a sanction. They no longer see now Australia as a sovereign risk in terms of their food security. We provide 300 tonne of meat per day to Indonesia, which they are not getting and will not get this year. You can't make it up from anywhere else except by ensuring that other countries now become a source of their protein, which I understand now they've got import permits to achieve just that.
Deb, is it important, the Prime Minister says she's working to get the trade restarted as soon as possible. Is it important that that happens very soon?
Look, I don't think we can forget how this journey started with those images that ABC produced in Four Corners, and there is real concern out there in the Australian community that we make sure that the animals that leave Australia and their welfare at the heart of a sustainable live export industry. And we have the opportunity now to work collaboratively with Indonesia, with the government and businesses, all working together to make sure that a sustainable industry comes out of this period of change. And change clearly needed to happen. You know, the alternative to advancing as we are, steadily responding to need, is to have no response at all. And I don't think that that's going to wash with the Australian people at all. We've got a $30 million package, an assistance package here, that will give $5,000 to primary producers and associated industries so that they can get through a little of the hardship that they're facing currently. But they can also apply for a grant of up to $20,000 as well. Now, it's not going to solve everybody's problems, but it is an initiative to help overcome some of the difficulties that we know that those producers are facing right now.
Nigel, you've talked about the problems you say it has created with Indonesia, but haven't the two countries gotten over bigger bumps in the relationship before, and won't they go over this one once the trade resumes?
Well, in between, you know, Indonesia have a responsibility to their own people. Ramadan starts on the 1st of August. And they are moving right now to ensure that they can secure their protein in more reliable markets than Australia. Yes, we'll probably get over it, but I'm not sure whether this industry will survive that period of time. When we call to have the trade industry resumed immediately, it's not an irresponsible call. Right at the moment, there are people in Australia with cattle ready to go. The cattle that get off at the other end don't go straight to processing plants. The cattle at the other end go into feedlots from between 90 to 150 days. right at the moment there are processing facilities in Indonesia, at least 4 processing facilities that meet OIE standards, and they also have full traceability through the entire chain. It's a closed chain. So that exists at the moment.
Jump in there and say, though, that we've had these sorts of assurances in the past, and Meat and Livestock Australia have given multiple assurances that everything was in order in Indonesia. You know, it took a television crew from the ABC to get over there and show us those photos to prove that it wasn't the case. And until a traceability that Australian people can trust is really established, and until this matter is resolved, we cannot just suddenly respond to this call, well, let's go back to business as usual, because clearly business as usual is not up to the standards that Australians have every right to expect. And I'm talking about the cattle industry itself and representatives from the cattle industry.
No one's asking to go back to business as usual.
That's
We are asking to go back
to Nigel have his say.
fully. We're not asking for business as usual. That's clearly not the case. We're asking for resumption of trade to those abattoirs that can demonstrate OIE standards, and they can today, and for those abattoirs to also have the capacity for full traceability. It's only 30% of the cattle in the Northern Territory don't have NLIS tags. They can be tagged on the way into the vessel. We now have hand-checking tag system. This can be done today, and it doesn't have to wait. But I acknowledge we're not going back to the bad old ways, and it's been acknowledged between 5 and 7% of those cattle that were Australian cattle were slaughtered in Indonesia were unable to trace, and were unable to find out what happened to them. That is never going to happen again. And it's not an assurance. This is a third-party endorsed quality assurance program that's actually been endorsed to ISO 2001. It's the highest international standard. So it's a third-party endorsed train, and it is ready for action today. And it's not about putting cattle on the boats and then going through a processing plant. The cattle get on the boats and they work from, as I said, between 60 and 150 days. And there is plenty of slack there to be able to ensure that we have the contracts in place, we have the NLIS tagging system in place that can facilitate that immediately. Any future delays in the opening of this trade, every day that goes on are communities and families that won't be able to start up again.
If we could move on, the Prime Minister, who was in Darwin today, also indulged in a little attempt to reframe the debate on a carbon tax a little. We'll just have a listen to what she had to say today.
I've always been determined to create an emissions trading scheme, and I've always been determined that the fixed price period would be as short as possible and we would get to that emissions trading scheme.
Deb O'Neill, given the amount of focus there has been on the broken promise on Julia Gillard saying during the election there wouldn't be a carbon tax under a government she led, is it in your political interest to get people's focus onto the emissions trading scheme that will follow the tax and get that ETS in as quickly as is possible?
Well, look, I think the language is always important, but what's most important is that 9 out of 10 Australian households are going to receive tax cuts, family payments or other payments so that they can make their contribution to making an impact on our climate issues without a price to their family. And that compensation that they're going to receive, that price that they're going to receive, the support is going to make a big difference to Australian families.
But hasn't that broken promise hurt Labor's standings and hurt the Prime Minister's standing?
I think it's really important that we focus on what's going to impact on families. You know, when I'm moving around in my electorate, people really are less interested in that sort of conversation and much more interested in what does it mean for them. They want to know that they're not going to be out of pocket. And let's face it, we've got, 30% are going to really benefit. We've got that Battler's buffer that's going to assist the most likely to be affected low-income families. And that is a commitment that Labor is going to ensure, and that will impact on people in my electorate far more than a media discussion about what was said when. I think it's very important that we tackle climate change, that we get on with making sure that 1,000 polluters pay to continue to pollute. And we need to be clear that, Tony Abbott's plan is to reach into households, take $720 out of families' pockets and give it to the polluters. The Labor plan is far different from that, making sure that people get this assistance with their family costs.
Nigel, do you accept that an emissions trading scheme has always been part of the government's mandate?
Look, what's happening now is that Julia wants to step as far away from the biggest lie in Australian political history. It took her a few days and a fair bit of pressure for her to acknowledge that she did say before the election that we'll not have a carbon tax under a government I lead. Clearly we are going to have a carbon tax, and this goes to credibility.
But it's only a temporary carbon tax, isn't it?
Well, who would know? I mean, if that's promised by Julia Gillard, I don't think the Australian people have too much confidence in anything she says, and I think that's why the polls are really where they are. She needs to stop trying to confuse people with rhetoric and just tell them exactly what's going on. A carbon tax she's going to move that we still don't understand exactly what it's about. We still don't understand the actual impact on families. Next week, Julia Gillard will have the opportunity to explain to Australian families exactly how much this is going to cost. And when she says, oh, it's okay, there's going to be tax cuts, well, when you're increasing taxes at the same time you're providing tax cuts, that's not a tax at all. It's a crock. And if it's a crock, let me tell you, in this part of the world, you don't go anywhere near it.
Deb O'Neill, do you want the details out as soon as possible? There's a lot of speculation today that a deal will be struck soon. When that deal is struck, do you want the details announced as soon as possibly can happen?
Look, the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee are really working very hard to deliver the best outcome for all Australians. And there have been some important details that have been released to reassure Australians that they won't be paying the price. The polluters will be paying a price, and they will change their behaviours as that price imperative is there. The shift to the ETS is going to be an important development, and obviously that's going to happen sooner rather than later. But the detail of all these things has to be carefully worked out, and if the government came out with a fully costed, fully funded, fully organised scheme before they consulted, we would have been damned by, you haven't consulted. Now, through this careful consultation process and in conversation with business interests as well, we're going to end up with a sustainable scheme that will benefit our nation, that will make an impact on the climate change that needs to be addressed without costing Australian families. Remember, 9 out of 10 are going to receive those payments to their family that will change the economics in their favour.
Nigel, the Treasurer released today some details of what he calls a reference scenario modelling. That's modelling on what would happen in the situation in the economy with no price on carbon. And he said for most of the economy, putting a price on carbon does not change the outcomes of the reference scenario. So indicating that there's not going to be that much effect on the economy. If the effect is so small, if the effect turns out to be so small, has the opposition been raising concern for no reason?
Well, not at all. I mean, Deb just mentioned it's about change in behaviour, and our ISIL Tasman have just done a lot of work on the actual trigger, the cost of carbon, the price of carbon to actually trigger the change from coal to gas. That's between $75 and $100 a tonne. And if we're looking at groceries having gone up for a household by up to $1,300 over the last year, we know that we're all experiencing as families severe increases in the cost of living. We know that a price on carbon is going to put the price of everything up. And if it has to get to $75 a tonne to convince the power producers to switch from coal to gas, then we're going to have the highest standard of the highest cost of living anywhere in the world. And the notion that we're suddenly doing this and it's going to change the globe is a completely failed notion.
And that's I'm sorry, Nigel, to interrupt you, but that's where we'll have to leave it today. We've run out of time. Nigel Scullion and Deb O'Neill, thank you very much for joining us on Capitol Hill today.
Thanks, Lyndall.
Lovely to talk to you.
And thank you for joining us too. Watch Capitol Hill at the same time tomorrow.